Matthew Reynolds sat alone at his usual corner table on the terrace of Riverside, an elegant restaurant perched on the 30th floor overlooking the Chicago River. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn, cool enough to keep most diners inside behind the glass walls. Matthew preferred it this way, the solitude of the terrace, the distant hum of the city below, the way the fading sunlight caught the windows of skyscrapers like embers burning in the gathering dusk. David, the waiter who had been serving Matthew every Thursday evening for the past 3 years, approached with practiced grace, carrying a plate covered by a polished silver dome. He placed it carefully on the white tablecloth. "Your confit duck, Mr. Reynolds, and the Pinot Noir you favor," David said, pouring a generous measure of deep burgundy wine into a crystal glass. He paused, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Will there be anything else this evening?" Matthew looked up, offering a brief smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, thank you, David. This is perfect." The waiter nodded and retreated, leaving Matthew once again with only the city skyline for company. Below him, Chicago pulsed with life. Thousands of people hurrying home to families, meeting friends for dinner, living lives connected to others. From his elevated perch, Matthew could see it all, yet felt separated from it, as though watching a movie without sound. He opened the worn leather journal that rested beside his plate. Once, its pages had been filled with sketches, ideas, dreams, designs for toys that would educate and delight children around the world. Now it contained only meeting notes, production schedules, profit margins. The handwriting was still his, but the soul behind the words had changed. He flipped to a blank page, picked up his pen, then set it down again with a quiet sigh. 15 years ago, in a cramped garage that smelled of sawdust and possibility, Matthew and Laura had started Reynolds Innovation with nothing but student loans and shared vision. Laura had been the dreamer, the artist whose elegant designs transformed simple wood and plastic into objects of wonder. Matthew had been the builder, the businessman who could take her sketches and make them real, then convince the world they were worth buying. "Every toy should tell a story," Laura used to say, her fingers tracing invisible shapes in the air as she spoke. "Every child deserves objects that speak to who they are, not just what adults want them to be." It had been Laura's vision that propelled them from that garage to their first small factory, then to the gleaming corporate headquarters that now employed over 200 people. But Laura hadn't lived to see their greatest successes. Cancer had claimed her 5 years ago, just as their company was beginning to truly flourish. The doctors had given her 6 months. She'd fought for 18, working until the very end, leaving behind designs and ideas that the company had been producing ever since. But now those reserves were running low, and Matthew hadn't been able to create anything new without her. He managed the business with mechanical efficiency, preserving Laura's legacy while feeling increasingly hollow inside. Matthew cut into his duck, watching steam rise into the cool evening air. Around him, the city lights were beginning to sparkle against the deepening blue of the sky. He took a sip of wine, savoring its complexity on his tongue. "Excuse me, mister? Can we have your leftovers?" The small voice came from behind him, so unexpected in the quiet of the empty terrace that Matthew nearly spilled his wine. He turned to find two identical little girls standing just beyond the iron railing that separated the terrace from the rooftop garden. Twins, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with matching blonde curls and wide blue eyes that regarded him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They wore simple dresses that had clearly been washed many times but were clean and carefully mended. One clutched a worn plush rabbit missing an ear, while the other held her sister's hand with determined protectiveness. Before Matthew could respond, David appeared as if materialized from the shadows, his professional smile replaced by a stern frown. "Hey, you can't be up here. This is a private dining area." The waiter moved toward the railing, gesturing sharply. "How did you even get onto this floor? Security will—" "It's all right," Matthew interrupted, his voice carrying an authority he rarely exercised. David stopped mid-sentence, looking surprised. "I'd like to speak with them." The waiter hesitated, then nodded stiffly and retreated, though he remained hovering near the door to the main dining room. Matthew rose from his chair and approached the railing, crouching slightly to meet the girls at eye level. This close, he could see the smudges of dirt on their cheeks in the careful way they held themselves, as though accustomed to being shooed away. "What did you say?" he asked gently. The girl without the rabbit, the one who seemed slightly taller, spoke again. We asked if we could have your leftovers, if you're done eating. Her voice was clear and surprisingly articulate for a child so young. Matthew felt something tighten in his chest. I've just started, actually. He glanced back at his barely touched meal, then at the hopeful faces before him. But I would be happy to share it with you. Would you like to join me? The girls exchanged a quick glance, communicating in that wordless way that twins often do. The smaller one with the rabbit nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, please, said the taller one. If it's not too much trouble. Matthew smiled, genuinely this time. No trouble at all. He turned toward David, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed disapproval. David, could we have 2 more plates, please? And perhaps some milk for my guests? The waiter's professional mask slipped back into place. Of course, sir. Right away. Matthew opened the gate in the railing and motioned for the girls to enter. They stepped onto the terrace carefully, their eyes widening as they took in the white tablecloths, gleaming silverware, and panoramic view of the city. I'm Matthew, he said, helping them into chairs across from his own. What are your names? I'm Sophie, said the taller one. She pointed to her sister. This is Lily. She doesn't talk as much as me, but she notices things. Lily clutched her rabbit tighter and offered a shy smile that transformed her solemn face. It's very nice to meet you both, Matthew said, settling back into his chair. Are you hungry? Both girls nodded, though they sat with their hands folded neatly in their laps, making no move toward the bread basket in the center of the table. Please help yourselves to some bread while we wait, Matthew encouraged. My food will be enough for all of us, but it might need to be divided. Sophie reached for a roll, broke it carefully in half, and passed one portion to her sister before taking a small bite of her own. The controlled deliberateness of her movements spoke of someone who had learned to make things last. Where are your parents? Matthew asked gently, as David returned with 2 additional place settings and glasses of milk. Our mom works at Miller's Grocery down the street, Sophie explained, watching with fascination as David arranged the silverware precisely beside their plates. She's not feeling good today. She's resting in the employee room. She's been coughing a lot, Lily added quietly, her first words since sitting down. She gets really hot and then really cold. Matthew frowned with concern. And she's working while she's sick? Sophie nodded. She says we can't afford for her to stay home, but she lets us come to work with her when we don't have school. Usually we sit in the break room and draw, but she fell asleep and we got hungry. David returned with a serving cart and began transferring portions of duck, confit, roasted vegetables, and herb potatoes onto the girls' plates. Matthew noticed how their eyes widened at the sight of the food, though they remained perfectly still, waiting. You may eat whenever you're ready, Matthew told them. No need to wait for anything. The girls picked up their forks and began to eat with surprising delicacy, using their silverware with the precision of children who had been carefully taught. Matthew found himself captivated by their measured movements and serious expressions. While they ate, Sophie pulled a folded paper napkin toward her and reached for a pen from her small pocket. With quick, confident strokes, she began to sketch the restaurant terrace, capturing the skyline beyond with remarkable accuracy for a child her age. That's quite good, Matthew said, genuinely impressed. You have a talent for drawing. Sophie shrugged, but a pleased smile flickered across her face. I remember things I see. Lily remembers things she feels. As if on cue, Lily looked up from her plate and studied Matthew's face with an intensity that was almost unnerving. You're sad, she said simply. You miss someone a lot. Matthew's hand jerked in surprise, knocking his knife to the floor. As he reached to retrieve it, his sleeve pulled back, revealing a long, thin scar that traced the inside of his wrist. He quickly adjusted his cuff, but not before Lily had seen it. Did that hurt? She asked, her voice soft with empathy rather than curiosity. Matthew swallowed hard, unsettled by the child's perception. Yes, he said finally. It did, but it was a long time ago. Sometimes old hurts still hurt, Lily said with the simple wisdom of a child who had seen more than she should have at her age. My mom says it's okay to remember the hurting, as long as you also remember the healing. Before Matthew could respond, the terrace door burst open. A young woman rushed out, her face flushed with fever and anxiety. She wore the green apron of Miller's Grocery over jeans and a simple blouse. Her blonde hair, the same shade as the twins, pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "Sophie, Lily!" Her voice cracked with relief and dismay as she spotted the girls. A deep, rattling cough shook her slender frame before she could say more. The twins turned, guilt and concern washing over their identical faces. "Mom!" Sophie stood quickly. "We're sorry, you were sleeping, and we got hungry," Lily finished, clutching her rabbit tighter. The woman hurried forward, her movements unsteady. Up close, Matthew could see the unnatural brightness of her eyes and the fine sheen of sweat on her forehead, despite the cool evening air. She was beautiful in a worn, determined way, like a flower growing through concrete. "I am so sorry," she said to Matthew, her voice hoarse. They know better than to wander off, and to bother someone during their meal. Another cough interrupted her words. Matthew stood. "They weren't bothering me at all. I invited them to join me." He extended his hand. "Matthew Reynolds." "Rebecca Harper." She shook his hand briefly, her fingers burning with fever. "Again, I apologize. I dozed off for just a moment at work, and they must have slipped out. I've been searching everywhere." "You should be home resting," Matthew said, concern evident in his voice. "You're clearly ill." Rebecca straightened her shoulders, pride overriding exhaustion. "I can't afford to miss shifts. We're fine." She turned to the girls. "Come on, you two. We need to get back before Mr. Miller notices I'm gone." "Let me help," Matthew offered. "I can call you a car, get you home safely, or to a doctor. You really should see someone about that cough." "We don't need charity," Rebecca said firmly, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "Thank you for looking after my daughters, but we'll be fine." Matthew recognized the stubborn dignity in her posture. It was the same pride that had kept him working 18-hour days after Laura died, refusing offers of help even when he was barely functioning. "At least let me give you this," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket for a business card. "Reynolds Innovation is always looking for talented, responsible people. If you ever need work, better work, please call me directly." Rebecca hesitated, then took the card, her fingers brushing against his. "Thank you," she said, clearly wanting to end the conversation. "Girls, say thank you to Mr. Reynolds." "Thank you for sharing your dinner," Sophie said politely. Lily looked up at Matthew with those disconcertingly perceptive eyes. "Thank you for being kind," she said softly. Rebecca took each girl by the hand and led them toward the door. As they were leaving, Matthew overheard Lily whisper to her mother, "Mommy, that man is very sad, like Grandpa was." Rebecca glanced back at Matthew, their eyes meeting across the terrace. Something passed between them, a flash of understanding, of shared experience with grief, before she turned away and disappeared with her daughters into the bustle of the restaurant. Matthew sat back down at his table, the remainder of his meal forgotten. The city lights had fully emerged now, a constellation of human presence against the night sky. For the first time in years, the vastness of Chicago didn't make him feel small and isolated. Instead, he felt strangely connected to the millions of stories unfolding in windows and streets below, particularly to the one that had just briefly intersected with his own. The small apartment in Chicago's South Side that Rebecca Harper shared with her twin daughters consisted of a single bedroom, a bathroom with temperamental plumbing, and a combination living room/kitchen that always smelled faintly of the Indian restaurant downstairs. It wasn't much, but Rebecca had worked hard to make it a home, with second-hand furniture carefully arranged to maximize space and colorful drawings by the girls taped to every wall. 3 days after the encounter at Riverside Restaurant, Rebecca sat at their small kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen with a growing despair. The email from her manager at Miller's Grocery was polite but final. Due to her excessive absences, her position had been terminated, effective immediately. Her final paycheck would be mailed within 2 weeks. Rebecca closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back tears of frustration. Her fever had finally broken yesterday, but the persistent cough remained, along with a bone-deep exhaustion that made even simple tasks challenging. She opened her banking app on her phone. $247.83 remained in her checking account. Rent was due in 5 days, $950 for their tiny apartment. On the table beside her laptop sat a stack of medical bills from her father's final illness 2 years ago, along with more recent ones from the girls' last checkups. The weight of these obligations pressed down on her chest more heavily than the lingering congestion in her lungs. "Mommy, can we have bath time now?" Sophie called from the living room, where the twins were carefully coloring in the second-hand books Rebecca had found at a church rummage sale. Rebecca coughed into her elbow, then forced a smile into her voice. "Yes, sweetie, let me get the water ready." She pushed herself up from the table, tucking the termination email and the bills into a drawer where the girls wouldn't see them. In the bathroom, she ran warm water into the tub, adding a capful of the bubble bath she saved for special occasions or particularly difficult days. Today certainly qualified as the latter. As steam filled the small bathroom, Rebecca caught her reflection in the mirror above the sink. Shadows underlined her eyes, and her normally healthy complexion was pallid. She looked older than her 33 years. Her hands trembled slightly as she tested the water temperature, an after effect of the fever or simply exhaustion. She wasn't sure. "Bubbles!" Lily exclaimed delightedly as the twins entered the bathroom, already wriggling out of their clothes. Rebecca helped them into the tub, smiling genuinely at their joy over such a simple pleasure. She sat on the closed toilet lid, supervising as they played, their concerns limited to building bubble beards and deciding which of their few bath toys would go on an adventure today. "Mommy, are you feeling better?" Sophie asked, her observant eyes studying Rebecca's face with concern too mature for a 5-year-old. "Much better," Rebecca lied, suppressing another cough. "Just a little tired." "The sad man at the restaurant was nice," Lily said, seemingly changing the subject as she often did, making connections only she could see. "He had good food." "He seemed lonely," Sophie added, sculpting a bubble mountain with serious concentration. "Why was he eating all alone?" Rebecca reached for a washcloth, wetting it to wipe soap from Lily's face. "Some people prefer to be alone," she said, though she remembered the profound solitude she'd sensed in Matthew Reynolds. It had resonated with something in her, the isolation of carrying too many burdens without anyone to share them. "Nobody likes to be alone all the time," Lily stated with conviction. Rebecca smiled at her daughter's certainty. "Maybe you're right, sweetheart." She squeezed shampoo into her palm and began washing Sophie's hair. "Tilt your head back, honey." As Sophie leaned back, Rebecca's vision suddenly blurred. The bathroom seemed to tilt sideways, steam and light swirling together. She gripped the edge of the tub, trying to steady herself. "Mommy?" Sophie's voice sounded distant. Rebecca tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing she remembered was a rushing sound in her ears and the sensation of falling. "Mommy!" Sophie's scream pierced through the fog, but Rebecca couldn't answer as darkness closed in around her. Sophie Harper did not panic when her mother collapsed onto the bathroom floor. Instead, she climbed carefully out of the tub, wrapped a towel around herself, and helped Lily do the same. Then she went to their mother, placing a small hand on Rebecca's forehead, the way she'd seen her mother do when checking for fever. "She's still really hot," Sophie told her twin, who stood clutching her towel with wide, frightened eyes. "We need to call Mrs. Jenkins." Mrs. Jenkins was their elderly neighbor who had given them strict instructions. If anything ever happened to their mother when they were alone, they were to call her immediately. Rebecca had programmed her number into the emergency contact on her phone for precisely this reason. With wet hands, Sophie picked up her mother's phone from the edge of the sink and pressed the emergency button, then Mrs. Jenkins' name. Water dripped onto the screen as she held it to her ear. "Rebecca, is everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Jenkins' voice answered after 2 rings. "This is Sophie," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mommy fell down in the bathroom. She won't wake up." There was a brief silence, then Mrs. Jenkins spoke with calm authority. "I'll be right there, honey. Is your door unlocked?" "No, but I can reach the lock." "Good girl, go unlock it, then go right back to your mother. I'll be there in 2 minutes." Sophie did as instructed, standing on tiptoes to slide the deadbolt open, then hurrying back to the bathroom where Lily had placed a folded towel under Rebecca's head and was patting her mother's hand. "Mrs. Jenkins is coming," Sophie told her sister, sitting down on the wet floor beside them. "It's going to be okay." Lily nodded solemnly, her complete trust in her twin evident in her eyes. "I know," she said simply. True to her word, Mrs. Jenkins arrived moments later, her house key jangling around her neck. gray hair still in curlers. The 65-year-old former nurse assessed the situation quickly, checking Rebecca's pulse and breathing. "She needs to go to the hospital," Mrs. Jenkins said firmly, pulling out her own phone to call 911. "This isn't just a cold or flu." While they waited for the ambulance, Mrs. Jenkins helped the girls dress in clean clothes and packed a small bag with their essentials. Sophie held Lily's hand tightly as paramedics arrived and lifted their mother onto a stretcher. "Can we go with her?" Sophie asked, her composure finally cracking as she watched her mother, pale and unconscious, being wheeled toward the door. Mrs. Jenkins put a gentle arm around each girl. "Of course you can, sweetie. I'll go with you too. Your mama won't be alone for a minute, I promise you that." At Memorial Hospital, the emergency room was a blur of bright lights, beeping machines, and hurried conversations over their heads. The twins sat side by side on uncomfortable plastic chairs in the waiting area, their small shoulders touching, while Mrs. Jenkins spoke with doctors and filled out forms using Rebecca's insurance card from her wallet. When the doctor finally came to speak with Mrs. Jenkins, his expression was grave. "Your friend has severe pneumonia," he told her, glancing at the twins. "We need to admit her immediately. Her oxygen levels are dangerously low and she's severely dehydrated. Has she been ill for some time?" "At least a week that I know of," Mrs. Jenkins replied. "She wouldn't take time off work. Single mother, you understand." The doctor nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "We'll take good care of her, but she'll need to stay for at least a few days." "What about her daughters?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, lowering her voice. "I can watch them tonight, but I have my shift at the care center tomorrow. I can't miss it. I'm already on thin ice after calling out last month for my hip." The doctor looked at the twins, who were watching the conversation with solemn attention despite not being able to hear the words. "Does she have any family who could help?" Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "Not that I know of. Her father passed a couple years back. There's no one else." In the semi-consciousness of fever and medication, Rebecca became aware of voices around her, the cool touch of an oxygen mask on her face, and the distant beeping of monitors. She forced her eyes open, panic rising as she remembered where she was and, more importantly, where her daughters should be. "Sophie? Lily?" Her voice was barely a whisper, muffled by the mask. A nurse appeared at her bedside. "Try not to talk, Miss Harper. You need to rest." Rebecca shook her head weakly, trying to remove the mask. "My daughters," she managed. "Where are my daughters?" "They're safe," the nurse assured her, gently restraining her hand. "They're in the waiting room with your neighbor. But we need to find someone who can care for them while you're here. Is there anyone we can call?" Rebecca's mind raced through her limited options. There was no family left. Her few friends were struggling, single mothers themselves, working multiple jobs. Miss Jenkins couldn't watch the girls for days. She needed her own job too desperately. In her feverish state, Rebecca's fingers found her jacket hanging on a hook near the bed. She fumbled in the pocket, withdrawing the business card she'd been carrying since that night on the restaurant terrace. "Call him," she whispered, pressing the card into the nurse's hand before slipping back into unconsciousness. "Please." 1 week after his encounter with Rebecca and the twins, Matthew sat in the glass-walled conference room at Reynolds Innovation headquarters, trying to focus on the marketing presentation being delivered by a young executive whose name he should probably remember but didn't. Around the polished mahogany table, department heads and board members watched graphs and projections flash across a large screen, some taking notes, others scrolling discreetly through their phones. "As you can see," the presenter continued, gesturing to a downward-sloping line, "our third-quarter sales have decreased approximately 20% compared to this time last year. The educational toy market is becoming increasingly competitive, and we're losing ground to TechToy's new interactive line." Richard Morgan, the company's chief financial officer and a member of the board, leaned forward, his tailored suit emphasizing his athletic build despite his 50 years. "The issue isn't market competition," he said, his deep voice cutting through the room. "It's innovation, or our lack of it. We haven't released a truly new product in what, Matthew, 3 years?" All eyes turned to Matthew, who maintained his composed expression despite the pointed question. Richard had been Laura's business professor in college and had helped them secure initial funding for the company. After Laura's death, he had offered to buy Matthew's shares at what was actually a very fair price. Matthew had refused then, and continued to refuse Richard's occasional suggestions that selling might be the best option. 2 years and 4 months, Matthew corrected evenly. The real-world science kits were entirely new and have underperformed sales projections by 30%, Richard countered, tapping his tablet screen. Face it, Matthew, we're running on fumes from Laura's legacy. At some point, we either need fresh creative direction or we need to consider strategic alternatives for the company. The phrase strategic alternatives, corporate speak for selling the business, hung in the air like a challenge. Matthew felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the casual mention of Laura's name in the same breath as suggestions to sell her dream. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the conference room door. Olivia Chen, Matthew's efficient executive assistant, entered with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Reynolds, but there's an urgent call that I believe you'll want to take." Her emphasis on urgent conveyed this wasn't something that could wait. Matthew excused himself and followed Olivia to his office, grateful for the interruption despite his curiosity. "It's from Memorial Hospital," Olivia explained as they walked down the corridor. "A Mrs. Jenkins called. She said she found your business card in Rebecca Harper's possession. She was quite insistent that you would want to know." Matthew stopped walking. "Rebecca Harper? The woman with the twin girls?" Olivia nodded. Mrs. Jenkins explained that Ms. Harper has been hospitalized with severe pneumonia. She's currently unconscious, and there's no one to care for her daughters. She hesitated, then added, "The hospital is asking if you might know of any family members they could contact." A vivid image of Sophie and Lily sitting alone in a hospital waiting room flashed through Matthew's mind. "I'll take the call in my office," he said, quickening his pace. 10 minutes later, Matthew was in his car, driving toward Memorial Hospital with a mixture of concern and bewilderment. Why had Rebecca kept his card? Why had she asked the hospital to call him of all people? They were strangers who had shared one brief conversation. Yet he couldn't forget the twins' solemn faces, or the quiet dignity with which Rebecca had refused his help despite clearly needing it. Something about their vulnerability had pierced the protective numbness he'd cultivated since Laura's death. At the hospital, Matthew found Mrs. Jenkins, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, sitting between Sophie and Lily in the waiting room. The girls were drawing on hospital notepads, their small heads bent in concentration. "Mr. Reynolds?" Mrs. Jenkins stood as he approached, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "How is she?" Matthew asked, shaking the offered hand. "Stable, but very ill. The doctor says it's bacterial pneumonia. She probably had it for weeks, but kept working through it until her body simply gave out." Mrs. Jenkins lowered her voice. "The real problem is the girls. I can't take them home with me tonight. I have to work a 12-hour shift at the care center where I'm employed. I've already called in too many times this year." Matthew glanced at the twins, who had looked up at the sound of his voice. Recognition dawned in their identical faces. "Restaurant man," Sophie exclaimed, standing up. "You came to see our mom?" "Hello, Sophie, Lily," Matthew said, feeling strangely moved that they remembered him. "Yes, I came to see how your mother is doing." Lily studied him with that unnervingly perceptive gaze. "She's sleeping a lot. The doctor says her lungs are sick." Mrs. Jenkins looked at Matthew with undisguised hope. "I hate to ask this of a stranger, but is there any way you could watch the girls for a few hours? Just until I finish my shift tomorrow morning? The hospital won't let them stay here without an adult, and I truly have nowhere else to take them." Matthew felt panic rise in his throat. Him? Watch 2 5-year-old girls? He had no experience with children beyond the obligatory product testing sessions his company conducted. He lived alone in a minimalist penthouse with glass tables and white furniture. It was possibly the least child-friendly environment in Chicago. But then Sophie took his hand, her small fingers trusting and warm. "Do you have any more drawings at your house? I brought my special pencils." Matthew looked down at her hopeful face, then at Lily's solemn one. He thought of Rebecca, alone in a hospital bed, having no one else to call but a stranger she'd met once. "Yes," he heard himself say. "I can watch them until you're available again, Mrs. Jenkins. They'll be perfectly safe with me." Relief washed over the older woman's face. "Thank you. I'll come directly after my shift ends at 8 tomorrow morning." She handed Matthew a small backpack. "Here are their things: pajamas, toothbrushes, In Lily's Rabbit, she can't sleep without it. After signing multiple forms at the nurse's station and leaving his contact information, Matthew found himself walking through the hospital parking garage with a small twin holding each of his hands. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. A 42-year-old CEO who could barely take care of his own emotional needs was now responsible for two children he hardly knew. "Have you ever been in a Tesla before?" he asked as they approached his car. Sophie's eyes widened. "A real Tesla? Like in the magazines?" "The very same," Matthew said, pressing the key fob to open the doors. "Does it fly?" Lily asked seriously. Matthew couldn't help but smile. "Not yet, unfortunately. Maybe the next model." As he helped them into the back seat and fumbled with unfamiliar car seat buckles, Matthew realized he was experiencing something he hadn't felt in years. The unsettling but oddly exhilarating sensation of being completely out of his depth. The sleek black Tesla wound its way through Chicago's evening traffic, carrying an unlikely trio toward the downtown skyline. Matthew glanced in the rearview mirror at his unexpected passengers. Sophie was pressed against the window, watching the city lights with fascination, while Lily sat quietly clutching her worn rabbit, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "We'll be at my office in about 10 minutes, Matthew explained, realizing he had no idea what to do with two 5-year-olds once they arrived. His penthouse was certainly no place for children, with its minimalist design and complete lack of anything remotely entertaining for kids. The office, at least, had conference rooms where the girls could rest while he figured out next steps. "Is that where you make toys?" Sophie asked, perking up. "Well, we design them there," Matthew clarified. "The actual manufacturing happens in factories." "Our mom makes toys too," Lily said softly, "but just for us." Matthew raised an eyebrow, curious. "What kind of toys does she make?" "Special one," Sophie answered. "She calls them feeling friends. They help us when we're sad or scared or angry." Before Matthew could ask more, his phone rang through the car's speaker system. Olivia's name flashed on the dashboard screen. "Yes, Olivia," he answered. "Mr. Reynolds, the board is asking when you'll return to finish the meeting." "Mr. Morgan specifically seems concerned." Matthew sighed. "Tell them something urgent came up and I'll need to reschedule for tomorrow morning. And Olivia, could you meet me at the office? I'm going to need some help." There was a brief pause. "Of course, sir. Is everything all right?" He glanced in the rearview mirror again at the twins. "Everything's fine. I just have some unexpected guests who'll be staying with me tonight. We'll be there in about 5 minutes." "Unexpected guests?" Olivia's voice carried a rare note of surprise. "I'll be waiting in the lobby, sir." When the Tesla pulled up to the gleaming glass tower of Reynolds Innovation Headquarters, Olivia Chen was indeed waiting, her professional composure faltering only slightly at the sight of Matthew emerging from the car with two small children. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, then stopped, clearly unsure how to proceed. "Olivia, meet Sophie and Lily Harper," Matthew said, guiding the twins forward. "Their mother is in the hospital, and they'll be staying with me tonight. Girls, this is Ms. Chen, who helps me run the company." Olivia recovered quickly, crouching down to the girls' level with a warm smile. "It's very nice to meet you both. You look tired. It must have been a long day at the hospital." Lily nodded solemnly. "Mommy's very sick. She couldn't wake up to say goodbye." A flash of concern crossed Olivia's face as she straightened and met Matthew's eyes questioningly. "Severe pneumonia," he explained quietly. "She's stable but unconscious. Their neighbor who was watching them had to leave for work, and there was no one else to call." Understanding dawned in Olivia's expression. With the efficient problem-solving that made her invaluable, she nodded and immediately took charge. "I think we should set up the small conference room next to your office," she suggested. "The sofa in there can be made up as a bed. I'll order some dinner for everyone and see if the vending machines have any snacks for now." Matthew felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Olivia. I don't know the first thing about caring for children." She smiled knowingly. "I have two nieces about their age. It's not so difficult. They mainly need food, rest, and a bit of patience." She turned to the twins. "Would you like to see where Mr. Reynolds works? I bet it's more interesting than a boring hospital waiting room." Sophie and Lily followed Olivia into the building with curiosity, holding hands as they had since leaving the hospital. Matthew trailed behind, struck by how small they looked in the vast marble lobby with its towering ceiling and gleaming surfaces. Upstairs, Olivia showed the girls into Matthew's spacious office while she went to prepare the conference room. The twins looked around with wide eyes at the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of nighttime Chicago, the elegant modern furniture, and the wall of awards and press coverage featuring Reynolds Innovation products. "Is this all yours?" Sophie asked, impressed. "It's where I work," Matthew answered, suddenly seeing the opulent space through their eyes, so different from the small apartment they likely shared with their mother. Sophie wandered to his desk, examining the neat arrangement of pens, the sleek computer monitor, and a small wooden figure that stood beside it. She pointed to the hand-carved toy soldier. "Did you make this?" "No," Matthew said softly. "My wife did. She was very talented at making things." "Where is she now?" Lily asked, joining her sister. Matthew hesitated, unaccustomed to discussing Laura with anyone, let alone children. "She died 5 years ago. She was very sick, like your mom is now, but much worse." The twins exchanged a glance, communicating silently. "Our grandpa died too," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "He was sick for a really long time. Mom says he's in heaven now, watching over us." "Mom says when people die, they aren't really gone," Lily added with quiet certainty. "They just change into something we can't see, but we can still feel them in our hearts." A lump formed in Matthew's throat. The simple wisdom in the child's words struck closer to home than all the condolences and philosophical discussions about grief he'd endured after Laura's death. "Your mom sounds very wise," he managed. Before the conversation could continue, Olivia returned. "The conference room is ready," she announced, "and I've ordered pizza. I hope that's acceptable for dinner." Sophie's face lit up. "Pizza? Really?" The genuine excitement over something as ordinary as pizza drove home the reality of these children's lives. Matthew wondered when they had last enjoyed such a simple treat. "Absolutely," he confirmed, "with whatever toppings you like." "Even pineapple?" Lily asked hopefully. Matthew laughed, surprising himself. "Even pineapple, though I may have to question your taste." Over the next hour, Olivia helped the girls get settled in the hastily converted conference room. She arranged cushions and throw blankets from the lobby furniture into a cozy nest on the large sofa, found paper and colored pencils for drawing, and even produced two small stuffed bears from the product's sample room. "These are from our classic comfort line," she explained, handing the soft toys to the delighted twins. "They need someone to test them and make sure they're good for hugging." When the pizza arrived, they all sat around the conference table, the formal business space transformed by the presence of children and the casual meal. Matthew watched as Sophie and Lily ate with careful manners but obvious hunger, and he wondered again about their home situation. Rebecca Harper had struck him as proud and capable, but clearly struggling financially. After dinner, Olivia helped the girls prepare for bed, using the executive bathroom to brush teeth and change into pajamas from their backpack. When they emerged in matching unicorn nightgowns, hair damp from washing their faces, Matthew felt an unexpected tug at his heart. "Thank you for your help, Olivia," he said as she prepared to leave for the night. "I honestly don't know what I would have done without you." "You'd have managed," she assured him with a smile. "Sometimes we rise to occasions we don't think we're prepared for." She lowered her voice. "Will you be all right overnight? I can stay if you need me to." Matthew shook his head. "We'll be fine. Their neighbor will pick them up in the morning. I can handle a few hours." After Olivia left, Matthew returned to the conference room where Sophie and Lily were already tucked under blankets on the sofa, looking drowsy but not quite ready for sleep. "Would you like me to read you a story?" he asked, then realized he had no children's books available. "We have our own," Sophie said, reaching for the backpack beside the sofa. She pulled out a well-worn picture book. "Mom always reads to us before bed." Matthew sat in an armchair beside the makeshift bed and accepted the book. "The Paper Bag Princess," he read from the cover. "I don't think I know this one." "It's about a princess who saves herself," Lily explained, settling deeper under the blanket with her rabbit tucked under her chin. As Matthew began to read, the familiar rhythm of a bedtime story came back to him. Laura had loved reading aloud, giving different voices to characters and adding dramatic pauses at just the right moments. Without thinking, he found himself doing the same, drawing smiles from the increasingly sleepy twins. By the time he finished the story, Lily's eyes had closed. her breathing deep and even. Sophie was fighting to keep her eyes open. "Thank you for helping us," she whispered, as Matthew tucked the blanket more securely around her. "Mom says we should always say thank you when someone is kind." "You're very welcome," Matthew whispered back. "Try to get some sleep now. Tomorrow we'll go see how your mom is doing." He dimmed the lights and moved to the doorway, watching as Sophie finally surrendered to exhaustion, curling protectively toward her sister. In sleep, their faces softened, the mature expressions they often wore melting away to reveal the very young children they actually were. Matthew retreated to his office, leaving the connecting door ajar so he could hear if they needed anything. He sank into his desk chair, suddenly aware of his own exhaustion. The day had taken an unexpected turn, pulling him out of his carefully controlled routine and thrusting him into responsibility for two vulnerable lives. He should work. There were emails to answer, reports to review, the rescheduled board meeting to prepare for. Instead, he found himself staring out at the city lights, thinking about Rebecca Harper, lying unconscious in a hospital bed with no one to call but a stranger she'd met once. What kind of life had she built for herself and her daughters? They were clearly well cared for despite what seemed to be significant financial constraints. The girls were polite, articulate, and surprisingly resilient. Whatever struggles Rebecca faced, she was clearly doing something right as a mother. Matthew's thoughts were interrupted by a small sound from the conference room. He rose quickly and went to check on the twins. Lily was whimpering in her sleep, her face scrunched in distress. Before Matthew could decide whether to wake her, Sophie stirred, instinctively reaching for her sister. "It's okay, Lily," she murmured, still half asleep herself. "Just a dream. I'm here." Lily quieted at her twin's voice, their hands finding each other even in sleep. Matthew watched from the doorway, struck by the bond between them. As an only child who had lost both parents by the time he was in college, he had never experienced that kind of instinctive connection with another person, except perhaps with Laura. He returned to his office, closing his eyes as memories of his wife washed over him. Laura would have known exactly what to do with the twins. She had wanted children of their own, but they had agreed to wait until the company was stable. By the time it was, the cancer diagnosis had already come, erasing all their plans for a family. Matthew opened his eyes, pushing the memories away as he had trained himself to do over the past 5 years. He reached for his laptop, determined to focus on work instead of grief or the two small children who had unexpectedly disrupted his carefully constructed isolation. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of Reynolds Innovation headquarters. Matthew awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented to find himself on the leather couch in his office, rather than in his bed at home. The events of the previous day came rushing back as he heard childish voices from the adjoining room. He straightened his rumpled clothes and ran a hand through his hair before going to check on the twins. Sophie and Lily were already awake, sitting cross-legged on the conference room sofa and examining something on Sophie's lap. "Good morning," Matthew said, stifling a yawn. "Did you sleep well?" Both girls looked up, their faces brightening. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," they replied in unison. "Please call me Matthew," he insisted, moving closer to see what had captured their attention. "What have you got there?" Sophie held up a smartphone with a cracked screen protected by a faded pink case. "It's Mom's phone. Mrs. Jenkins gave it to us so we could look at pictures if we got sad." She turned the phone to show Matthew the screen, which displayed a photo of Rebecca and the twins at what appeared to be a park, all three smiling broadly at the camera. "That's from my birthday," Lily explained. "Mom made us a picnic with cupcakes." "May I see?" Matthew asked, sitting beside them. Sophie nodded and began scrolling through photos. Most were of the twins at various ages, as babies, toddlers, and more recently. Rebecca appeared in some, always with the same warm smile despite the visible exhaustion in her eyes. There were photos of a frail older man whom Matthew assumed was their grandfather, and several showing homemade toys carefully constructed from recycled materials. "What are these?" he asked, pointing to a set of wooden dolls with interchangeable facial features. "Those are Mom's feeling friends," Sophie explained, brightening. "She makes them special for each of us. Look, you can change their faces to show how you feel." She swiped to a video and pressed play. The short clip showed Rebecca sitting at a small table, demonstrating how the wooden doll's faceplates could be swapped to display different emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and calm. Her voice was gentle as she explained to the camera. See, Lily? When you're feeling too big inside and can't find the words, your feeling friend can show me what's happening in your heart. Matthew was struck by the simple ingenuity of the design. The dolls were clearly handmade, crafted from reclaimed wood and painted with careful attention to detail. The interchangeable faceplates attached with small magnets embedded in the wood, a clever solution that allowed even small fingers to easily change the expressions. Your mother made these herself? He asked, impressed. Lily nodded. She makes all our toys. She says store toys cost too much money and break too easy. Can I see more of these feeling friends? Matthew asked. His professional interest piqued. Sophie scrolled to more photos showing variations of the dolls, some with different hair colors, some representing different ages or wearing different clothes. One photo showed a collection of emotion plates arranged in a wooden box with compartments labeled with simple words like mad, scared, and happy. Mom says everyone needs help saying how they feel sometimes, Lily explained, watching Matthew's face carefully. Even grown-ups. Matthew was about to respond when a knock at the office door interrupted them. Olivia entered, perfectly put together despite the early hour, carrying a tray with breakfast items and a small shopping bag. Good morning, she greeted them cheerfully. I thought you might be hungry, so I brought some breakfast. And I stopped at the store for a few essentials. She set the tray on the conference table and held up the shopping bag. New toothbrushes, some children's shampoo, and clean t-shirts that might work as dresses on you two. The twins' eyes widened at this unexpected bounty. They scrambled off the sofa, thanking Olivia profusely as they examined the colorful toothbrushes and bright t-shirts with cartoon characters on the front. You're a lifesaver, Matthew told her quietly. I didn't even think about morning necessities. Olivia smiled. Happy to help. Oh, and Mrs. Jenkins called. She's running a bit late after her shift, but should be here by 9 to take the girls back to the hospital. She glanced at her watch. That gives you about an hour. I've cleared your schedule until 11, so you'll have time to check on their mother if you want to. After a breakfast of muffins, fruit, and milk, and a quick cleanup in the executive bathroom, the twins seemed transformed. Their hair was neatly combed, their faces freshly washed, and the oversized t-shirts Olivia had brought worked surprisingly well as casual dresses over their leggings. While waiting for Mrs. Jenkins to arrive, Matthew gave them a tour of the office. He hadn't planned to show them the product display room, but Sophie spotted the glass doors as they walked down the hallway and pressed her face against the glass with undisguised curiosity. What's in there? She asked. It looks like a toy store. Matthew hesitated only briefly before using his key card to unlock the doors. This is where we keep samples of all our products, he explained as the twins entered the large showroom. Glass shelves lined the walls, displaying educational toys of all types, science kits, building blocks, puzzles, and games, all bearing the Reynolds Innovation logo, a stylized R with a small star. In the center of the room, interactive displays allowed visitors to test various products. Sophie and Lily moved through the space with reverent quiet, occasionally reaching out to touch a toy with careful fingers before looking to Matthew for permission. You can play with anything you like, he assured them. That's what they're here for. While Sophie gravitated toward a set of magnetic building tiles, Lily examined a display of plush animals designed to teach children about different ecosystems. She picked up a small, soft polar bear, studying it thoughtfully. Your company made all these? She asked, stroking the bear's fur. Matthew nodded. Yes, we design them here and then have them manufactured. Our mommy would love this place, Sophie said, constructing a complex geometric shape with the magnetic tiles. She always stops to look at toys in store windows, but we hardly ever go inside. Too expensive, Lily added matter-of-factly, returning the polar bear to its shelf. Sophie suddenly straightened, pointing to the Reynolds Innovation logo on a nearby box. Hey, that's the same star that's on Mom's Feeling Friends. Look, Lily. Matthew frowned, confused. What do you mean? On the back of our dolls, Sophie explained, Mom puts a little star, just like that one. She says it's to remind us that we're all made of stardust. Can I see a picture? Matthew asked, his curiosity growing. Sophie retrieved her mother's phone and scrolled until she found a close-up image of the back of one of the wooden dolls. Sure enough, there was a small star carved into the wood, similar but not identical to the company's logo. As Sophie continued scrolling through photos, Matthew glimpsed something else that caught his attention. Wait, can you go back a few pictures? Sophie obliged, returning to an image of what appeared to be a framed certificate hanging on a wall. Matthew zoomed in, his surprise growing as he recognized the document, a partial diploma from Cornell University's Design and Environmental Analysis program, with Rebecca Harper's name clearly visible. "This is your mother's college diploma?" he asked. "Kind of," Sophie answered. "She says it's her almost diploma because she couldn't finish school. Grandpa got hurt, and she had to come home to take care of him." The pieces were beginning to connect in Matthew's mind. A talented toy designer with formal training in product design, creating educational toys with limited resources. No wonder Rebecca had kept his business card. Reynolds Innovation would be a perfect fit for someone with her skills. Before he could pursue this line of thought, Olivia appeared at the door. "Mrs. Jenkins has arrived," she announced. The elderly neighbor looked exhausted after her night shift, but smiled warmly at the twins as they ran to greet her. "There are my girls," she said, hugging them both. "All ready to go see your mama? The hospital called, and she's awake now." Sophie and Lily cheered at this news, jumping with excitement. Their relief was palpable, and Matthew realized how worried they must have been despite their composed behavior. "Thank you for looking after them, Mr. Reynolds," Mrs. Jenkins said, shaking his hand. "I can take them from here." "Actually," Matthew said, making a sudden decision, "I'd like to come with you to the hospital, if that's all right. I want to see how Ms. Harper is doing myself." Mrs. Jenkins raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I'm sure she'd appreciate that, and it would give me a chance to go home and rest for a bit before my next shift." Within 30 minutes, Matthew found himself walking down the sterile corridors of Memorial Hospital, a twin holding each of his hands as they followed a nurse to Rebecca's room. He felt oddly nervous, unsure of how she would react to his involvement in her daughter's care. The hospital room was standard issue, beige walls, linoleum floor, machines beeping quietly beside the bed. Rebecca was propped up against pillows, looking pale and drawn, but undeniably alert. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw Matthew entering behind her daughters. "Mommy!" the twins cried in unison, rushing to the bedside. Rebecca's face transformed with love as she reached for her daughters, though she was clearly too weak to embrace them properly. "My beautiful girls," she said, her voice hoarse. "I missed you so much." "We slept at Mr. Reynolds' office," Sophie reported excitedly, "and we had pizza for dinner." "With pineapple," Lily added importantly. Rebecca's gaze moved from her daughters to Matthew, confusion and embarrassment evident in her expression. "Mr. Reynolds, I don't know what to say. Thank you for looking after them, but you really didn't have to." "Please call me Matthew," he interrupted gently, "and it was no trouble. Your daughters are remarkable children." A nurse entered, checking Rebecca's vitals and adjusting her IV. "10 minutes only," she warned. "Ms. Harper needs her rest if she's going to recover quickly." When the nurse left, Rebecca turned back to Matthew. "I'm so sorry to have imposed on you. I wasn't thinking clearly when I gave them your card. There was no one else to call." "I'm glad you did," Matthew said sincerely. "But I am concerned about what happens next. The doctor told me you'll need to stay here for at least a few more days." Rebecca's face fell. "I know, I've been trying to figure it out. Mrs. Jenkins can't watch the girls during her shifts, and I don't have any family to call." She lowered her voice so the twins, who were drawing on hospital notepads in the corner, couldn't hear. "And I just lost my job at the grocery store. I don't know how I'm going to pay for this hospital stay, let alone our rent." The naked vulnerability in her admission clearly cost her pride, but her daughter's welfare obviously outweighed her personal comfort. Matthew made another impulsive decision, surprising himself. "I have a proposition for you," he said quietly. "A professional one." Rebecca looked skeptical. "What kind of proposition?" "I saw some photos of the toys you make for your daughters. The feeling friends, they called them. They're quite impressive, especially considering the limited resources you're working with." Rebecca's cheeks flushed slightly. "They're just something I came up with to help the girls process their emotions after my father died. Nothing special." "I disagree," Matthew said firmly. The design is innovative. The execution is clever despite material constraints, and the concept has genuine therapeutic value. Reynolds Innovation has been looking to expand into the emotional intelligence market for children, and your design could be exactly what we need. Rebecca stared at him, disbelief evident in her expression. Are you offering me a job? A consulting position to start, Matthew clarified, to develop your concept into a prototype for market testing. It would come with health insurance that would cover this hospital stay and any follow-up care you need. And, he added, seeing her hesitation, we could arrange temporary accommodations for you and the girls until you are back on your feet. Rebecca's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Matthew considered his answer carefully. Professionally speaking, I recognize talent when I see it. Your design shows an intuitive understanding of child psychology combined with practical problem-solving skills. Exactly what our company values. He paused. And personally, I know what it's like to face difficult circumstances alone. Rebecca studied his face, searching for signs of insincerity or ulterior motives. Finding none, she sighed deeply. I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Reynolds. Matthew, he corrected again. And this isn't charity, it's a business proposition. You have skills our company needs. We have resources that could help you through this difficult time. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Before Rebecca could respond, the nurse returned to usher them out, insisting her patient needed rest. Matthew promised to return the next day to discuss the details further, if she was interested. As he left the hospital with the twins safely in Mrs. Jenkins' care, Matthew wondered what had possessed him to make such an offer. It was impulsive, potentially complicated, and would certainly raise eyebrows at the company. Richard would undoubtedly question his judgment. Yet something about Rebecca Harper and her ingenious wooden dolls had sparked his interest in a way nothing had since Laura's death. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of the creative excitement that had driven him and Laura to start their company in the first place. 3 months later, Rebecca sat at a workstation in Reynolds Innovation's design department, carefully attaching magnetic faceplates to a wooden prototype. Her pneumonia had finally cleared after 2 weeks in the hospital, and she had spent the past 10 weeks learning the ropes of corporate product development. The transition hadn't been easy. Some of the professional designers clearly resented her presence, viewing her as an uneducated interloper who had somehow charmed her way into their domain. Others were simply curious about the single mother who had caught their CEO's attention with handmade toys. Rebecca ignored the office politics and focused on her work. Matthew had given her a challenging assignment: develop a complete prototype line of emotion dolls the marketing department had deemed Feeling Friends too informal, with interchangeable faces, accessories, and a guidebook for parents and therapists. How's it coming along? Matthew's voice startled her from her concentration. Rebecca looked up to find him standing beside her workstation, his tie loosened after a day of meetings. In the 3 months since their unusual introduction, she had come to know him as a fair but demanding boss, a brilliant businessman, and a surprisingly thoughtful person beneath his reserved exterior. I think I've solved the attachment issue, she replied, demonstrating how the new magnetic system allowed the faceplates to snap securely into place, while remaining easy for small hands to change. The design team helped me refine the mechanism. Matthew picked up the prototype, examining it with the expert eye of someone who had spent his career in toy manufacturing. This is excellent work. The quality is exactly what we're looking for. Rebecca allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Thank you. It means a lot coming from you. The board meeting to review the concept is scheduled for next Friday, Matthew reminded her. Are you ready to present? Rebecca's stomach tightened at the thought of presenting to the company's board of directors. I think so. Dr. Bennett's preliminary evaluation from the child psychology perspective was very positive. She thinks the therapeutic applications could be significant. Good, her endorsement carries weight. Matthew hesitated, then added, Richard Morgan will be there. He's skeptical about the project. Rebecca had heard about Richard from other employees, the intimidating CFO who had been pushing for more commercially viable products and less experimental concepts. She had yet to meet him personally, but his shadow loomed large over the Emotion Dolls project. Because of the production costs? She asked. Matthew nodded. Handcrafted wooden toys with multiple components aren't cheap to manufacture at scale. He's concerned about profit margins. He didn't mention Richard's other concern, that Matthew was letting personal feelings cloud his business judgment by championing Rebecca's project. "I've been working with engineering on that," Rebecca said. "We're exploring sustainable wood composites that would reduce costs while maintaining quality and durability. And the educational market is willing to pay premium prices for products with genuine developmental benefits." Matthew smiled, impressed by her business acumen. "You've done your homework." "I've had to," she replied simply. "This opportunity means too much to risk being unprepared." Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call from the company's front desk. "Mr. Reynolds, the school called. Your guests have arrived early for their tour." Matthew checked his watch. "That's Sophie and Lily's class. I invited them for an educational tour of the design facilities." He glanced at Rebecca. "I hope that's all right." The girls were so excited when their teacher mentioned field trips, and this seemed like a natural fit. Rebecca's expression softened. "Of course it's all right. It's incredibly thoughtful of you." Since her release from the hospital, Rebecca and the twins had been staying in a company-owned apartment used for visiting executives. The arrangement was temporary, just until Rebecca's first paycheck allowed her to find a more permanent solution, but it had provided much-needed stability during her recovery. What had surprised Rebecca most was Matthew's continued interest in the twins' welfare. He had helped enroll them in a good school near the office, occasionally joined them for dinner to discuss the progress of the Emotion Dolls project, and seemed genuinely delighted by their unique personalities. "You've done so much for us already," Rebecca said quietly as they walked toward the elevator. "The Gaitim, the apartment, the girls' school. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Matthew looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, as he always did. "The job is because you're talented. The rest is just being decent." He pressed the elevator button. "Besides, Sophie and Lily remind me of what's important. I'd forgotten that for a long time." The elementary school group was easy to spot in the sleek corporate lobby, 20 energetic 5- and 6-year-olds barely contained by their harried teacher and 2 parent volunteers. Sophie and Lily broke formation when they spotted their mother running across the marble floor to embrace her. "Mom, did you know we were coming?" Sophie asked excitedly. "Mr. Reynolds told me just now," Rebecca replied, kneeling to hug them both. "Are you having a good field trip?" "It's the best," Lily declared. "We saw a 3D printer making toy parts. It was like magic." The teacher approached, smiling apologetically. "Ms. Harper, I hope it's not disruptive having us visit your workplace." When Mr. Reynolds offered the tour, it seemed like such a wonderful educational opportunity. "It's perfect," Rebecca assured her. "And please call me Rebecca." As Matthew led the school group toward the product testing area, Rebecca watched him interact with the children. For a man who had seemed so isolated when she first met him, he showed surprising patience and warmth with the energetic kindergartners, answering their endless questions and demonstrating how various toys worked. Later that afternoon, after the school group had departed and Rebecca had returned to her workstation, she found herself drawn to explore more of the building. She had been so focused on her specific project that she had never ventured beyond the design department in the main conference rooms. A quiet hallway led her to a door marked simply Archive. Curiosity piqued, she tried the handle and found it unlocked. Inside was a carefully preserved collection of Reynolds Innovations history, original sketches, prototype models, press clippings, and photographs documenting the company's evolution. Rebecca moved through the room slowly, studying the progression of designs over the years. She could see the influence of different eras and educational philosophies in the toys, but there was a consistent thread of thoughtful innovation throughout. At the center of the room stood a display case containing what appeared to be the very first Reynolds Innovation product, a beautifully crafted wooden puzzle designed to teach spatial reasoning. Beside it was a framed photograph of a much younger Matthew and a woman with vibrant red hair and a brilliant smile, both holding the puzzle between them with evident pride. "That was Laura," a voice said from the doorway. Rebecca turned to find Matthew watching her, his expression unreadable. "Your wife?" she asked softly. He nodded, entering the room. "That photo was taken the day we landed our first major order, 5,000 units for a national educational catalog. We were still working out of our garage then." A faint smile crossed his face at the memory. We celebrated with champagne and paper cups because we couldn't afford proper glasses. Rebecca studied the photograph more closely. She's beautiful. She looks so alive. She was, Matthew agreed, moving to stand beside her. Brilliant, creative, unstoppable. This company was her vision more than mine. I was just the guy who knew how to build what she designed and sell it to the world. The raw grief in his voice made Rebecca want to reach out to him, but she maintained a respectful distance. I'm sorry, she said simply. It's hard losing someone who's part of your foundation. Matthew looked at her with surprise, as if he hadn't expected her to understand so precisely. Yes, he said quietly. That's exactly what it's like. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Rebecca's phone chimed with a text message. I should get back to work, she said, moving toward the door. Thank you for showing me this place. It helps to understand the company's roots. Rebecca, Matthew called as she reached the doorway. Laura would have loved your emotion dolls concept. She always said toys should help children understand themselves, not just the world around them. The simple statement affected Rebecca more deeply than she expected. Thank you for telling me that, she said, her tones thick with the emotion as she left the archive room. That evening, as Rebecca helped the twins with their homework in the company apartment, she found herself thinking about Matthew and Laura Reynolds. The archive room had revealed a different side of the Reserve CEO, a man who had once been part of a passionate partnership, building a dream with someone he loved. Mom, can you help me with this math problem? Sophie asked, interrupting her thoughts. Rebecca turned her attention to the worksheet, explaining the concept of simple addition using drawings to illustrate the numbers. As always, Sophie grasped the idea quickly, while Lily was more interested in coloring the pictures than solving the equations. Mr. Reynolds is nice, Lily said suddenly, looking up from her coloring. But he's sad inside. Rebecca had noticed her younger daughter's growing attachment to Matthew and her uncanny ability to sense his emotions. Yes, sweetie, I think he is sad sometimes. His wife died, and that's a very hard thing. Like when Grandpa died, Sophie asked. Similar, yes. Rebecca considered how to explain grief to 5-year-olds. When you love someone very much and they go away forever, it leaves a big empty space inside you. It takes a long time for that space to feel less empty. We should tell him about Grandpa's stars, Lily suggested. Rebecca smiled, remembering her father's bedtime ritual with the twins. What do you mean, honey? Remember how Grandpa said that when people see, they become stars in the sky? Lily explained. And that's why we should never be afraid of the dark, because it's full of people who loved us, watching over us. That's a beautiful thought, Rebecca said, smoothing Lily's hair. Maybe someday you can share that with Mr. Reynolds if it seems like the right time. Later, after the twins were asleep, Rebecca sat at the small dining table with her laptop, working on her presentation for the board meeting. She had just finished a slide about the psychological benefits of the emotion dolls when a new email notification appeared in the corner of her screen. The message was from the Human Resources Department, confirming that her temporary consulting contract would be reviewed at the upcoming board meeting alongside the product concept. The subtext was clear. If the board rejected the Emotion Dolls project, her position at Reynolds Innovation would likely end as well. Rebecca closed her eyes, suddenly feeling the weight of everything riding on this presentation. It wasn't just a job at stake. It was healthcare for her family, stability for the twins, and the chance to finally use her education and talents in a meaningful way. After years of struggling to keep her head above water while caring for her father and raising her daughters alone, this opportunity felt like her last best hope. Opening her eyes, she returned to her presentation with renewed determination. She would make the board see the value in her concept, not just for the company's bottom line, but for the children who would benefit from it. She owed that much to Sophie and Lily, to herself, and perhaps even to the memory of Laura Reynolds, whose vision had created a space where ideas like hers could flourish. The day of the board meeting arrived with a nervous energy that permeated the entire design department. Rebecca had been up since dawn, reviewing her presentation and ensuring her prototype samples were in perfect condition. She wore her one professional outfit, a navy blue dress she had purchased secondhand for job interviews, now carefully tailored to fit her slender frame. As she arranged her demonstration materials in the main conference room, Rebecca tried to calm her racing heart. She had presented designs in college, but never to a group with the power to completely change the trajectory of her life and her daughter's futures. "You look like you could use this," said a friendly voice from the doorway. Olivia entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had become an unexpected ally over the past months, helping Rebecca navigate the corporate environment and occasionally watching the twins when Rebecca needed to work late. "Thank you," Rebecca said gratefully, accepting the steaming cup. "Is it that obvious I'm nervous?" "Only to someone who knows the signs," Olivia replied with a reassuring smile. "But you're going to do great. The concept is solid, your prototypes are beautiful, and Dr. Bennett's endorsement is a powerful validation." Rebecca sipped her coffee, trying to draw strength from Olivia's confidence. "And Richard Morgan? Any advice on handling him?" Olivia's expression grew more serious. "Be prepared for tough questions about manufacturing costs and market size. He's a numbers person, so have your data ready. And," she hesitated, "don't take it personally if he seems dismissive. That's just his way." Before Rebecca could ask more, the conference room began to fill with board members and department heads. Matthew arrived last, looking every inch the CEO in a perfectly tailored suit. He caught Rebecca's eye across the room and gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. "Good morning, everyone," he began once all were seated. "Today's main agenda item is the presentation of a new product concept that I believe has significant potential for Reynolds Innovation. As you know, we've been seeking to expand our educational offerings into the emotional intelligence space, and Ms. Harper has developed a concept that addresses this need in an innovative way." He turned to Rebecca. "The floor is yours, Ms. Harper." Rebecca took a deep breath and moved to the front of the room. For a fleeting moment, she saw herself as others might, a single mother from a struggling neighborhood, standing before a group of corporate executives with power and privilege she could barely imagine. Then she remembered why she was there. Her design was good. Her idea had value. And most importantly, she was doing this for Sophie and Lily. "Good morning," she began, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'm here to present the Emotion Dolls concept, a line of interactive toys designed to help children recognize, express, and manage their emotions in a healthy way." As she moved through her presentation, Rebecca felt her confidence growing. She explained the psychological framework behind the design, demonstrated the prototypes with their interchangeable facial expressions, and presented the market research showing increased parental concern about children's emotional development. "In today's world, children face unprecedented levels of stress and anxiety," she continued, "yet many lack the vocabulary or tools to express what they're feeling. The Emotion Dolls provide a concrete, tactile way for children to identify and communicate their emotions, opening pathways for discussion with parents and caregivers." She played a video of Dr. Eleanor Bennett, a respected child psychologist, demonstrating the prototypes with actual children in a clinical setting. The footage showed remarkable moments of breakthrough as children who had struggled to verbalize their feelings used the dolls to express complex emotional states. "As you can see," Rebecca concluded, "these aren't just toys. They're tools for emotional growth and family connection. And they align perfectly with Reynolds Innovation's mission to create products that educate and enrich children's lives." When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the questions began. Most were thoughtful and constructive, focused on market positioning and educational applications. Rebecca answered each confidently, drawing on her research and the practical knowledge gained from creating the original dolls for her daughters. Then Richard Morgan leaned forward, his expression skeptical. In his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and the physique of someone who still found time for daily workouts, despite his executive schedule, he exuded authority and business acumen. "Ms. Harper," he began, his tone coolly professional, "your presentation is certainly passionate, but I have concerns about the commercial viability of this concept. The production costs for wooden toys with multiple components are significantly higher than our standard plastic offerings. Have you calculated the potential return on investment if we commit to full production?" Rebecca had anticipated this question. "Yes, Mr. Morgan. While the initial production costs are higher, our market research indicates that parents are willing to pay premium prices for toys with genuine developmental benefits, particularly in the therapeutic space." She brought up a slide showing comparative pricing data. Furthermore, we've been working with the engineering department on sustainable wood composites that would reduce manufacturing costs by approximately 30% while maintaining the tactile quality that's essential to the concept. Richard's expression remained unconvinced. And what about digital alternatives? Most children today are drawn to apps and screens. Isn't a wooden doll with interchangeable faces rather old-fashioned? A ripple of amusement passed through the room, but Rebecca didn't flinch. Actually, that's precisely the point. In an increasingly digital world, children are experiencing what developmental psychologists call a tactile deficit. Physical, hands-on play is essential for certain types of cognitive and emotional development. She paused, meeting his gaze directly. And while apps certainly have their place, you can't hug an iPad when you're feeling scared at night. That earned a few chuckles from the board members and even a ghost of a smile from Richard. But he wasn't finished. One final question, Ms. Harper. Your background is in what exactly? I don't see a formal design, education, or toy industry experience in your file. The question was clearly designed to undermine her credibility, and Rebecca felt a flush of embarrassment and anger. Before she could respond, Matthew intervened. Ms. Harper studied design and environmental analysis at Cornell University with a focus on human-centered design, he stated calmly. And while she may not have formal industry experience, her intuitive understanding of children's developmental needs is evident in the concept itself. He turned to Rebecca. But perhaps you'd like to explain your background in your own words. Rebecca appreciated the opening but resented needing to justify herself. Still, she kept her voice level as she replied, I was unable to complete my degree due to family circumstances, Mr. Morgan. My father suffered a serious accident during my final year, and I left school to care for him. She straightened her shoulders slightly, but I continued to study independently and apply design principles to solve practical problems. The original emotion dolls were created to help my twin daughters process complex feelings after their grandfather's death. They weren't designed for a commercial market. They were designed to meet a real human need. And I believe that's the foundation of truly successful products. The room fell silent. Several board members were nodding slightly, seemingly impressed by her candor and conviction. Richard's expression was inscrutable as he made a note on his tablet. Thank you, Ms. Harper, Matthew said, breaking the tension. Unless there are further questions, I think we've covered the main points of the proposal. He looked around the table. We'll take a brief recess and then reconvene for discussion and a decision. As the board members filed out for the break, Rebecca began gathering her materials, her hands trembling slightly with the release of tension. She had done her best, said what needed to be said. Now it was out of her hands. You did well, Matthew told her quietly as the room emptied. Very well. Did I? Rebecca wasn't so sure. Richard clearly isn't convinced. Richard is rarely convinced of anything immediately, Matthew replied, but he listened, which is more than he does for many new concepts, and the other board members seemed impressed. Rebecca nodded, trying to take comfort in his assessment. What happens now? Now you go back to your workstation while we discuss and vote, Matthew explained. I'll let you know the outcome as soon as we've reached a decision. The next 2 hours were among the longest of Rebecca's life. She sat at her desk, unable to focus on any other work, alternating between hope and despair as she replayed every moment of her presentation in her mind. Had she been clear enough? Convincing enough? Had her lack of formal credentials ultimately undermined her concept? Finally, Olivia appeared at her workstation. Matthew would like to see you in his office, she said, her expression revealing nothing. Rebecca's heart pounded as she made her way to the executive floor. This was it, the moment that would determine whether her brief taste of stability and professional fulfillment would continue or come to an abrupt end. Matthew was standing by the window when she entered, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. He turned as she closed the door behind her, and she searched his face for some indication of the board's decision. They approved it, he said simply. The Emotion Dolls project will move forward to full development and production. Relief flooded through Rebecca so intensely that she had to grip the back of a chair to steady herself. Really? Even with the higher production costs? Matthew nodded, a smile breaking through his usually reserved demeanor. Really, your presentation was compelling, and Dr. Bennett's endorsement carried significant weight. The board agreed that the therapeutic and educational value justifies the premium price point. And Richard? Rebecca couldn't help asking. Richard abstained from the vote, Matthew replied, his expression growing more serious. He still has concerns about profit margins, but he acknowledged the concept's merits. Rebecca sank into the chair, the tension of the past weeks finally releasing. I can't believe it, she whispered. Thank you for giving me this chance. You earned it, Matthew said firmly. And there's more. The board has approved your transition from consultant to full-time employee with the title of Project Design Director for the Emotion Dolls line. It comes with a significant salary increase, full benefits, and stock options. Rebecca stared at him, stunned. This was beyond anything she had hoped for. A real career, financial security for her family, professional recognition of her abilities. Say something, Matthew prompted, looking slightly concerned by her silence. I don't know what to say, Rebecca admitted, her voice thick with emotion. This changes everything for me and the girls. Everything. You deserve it, Matthew said quietly. Your talent deserves to be recognized and developed. And Reynolds Innovation needs fresh thinking like yours. He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. Laura would have been the first to champion your concept. She always believed that toys should nurture the whole child, mind, body, and heart. The mention of Laura brought a warmth to Rebecca's chest. Over the past months, she had come to feel a curious connection to this woman she had never met, a kindred spirit whose vision had created the company that was now changing her life. I wish I could have known her, Rebecca said softly. Matthew's eyes grew distant for a moment. She would have liked you, he said finally. Your determination, your creativity, the way you put your daughters first, always. An awareness of something shifting between them hung in the air, a recognition of mutual respect evolving into something less easily defined. Rebecca felt it and saw that Matthew felt it too, though neither acknowledged it directly. I should go call the girls, she said, breaking the moment. Sophie and Lily will be so excited when I tell them the dolls are going to be real toys that other children can play with. Matthew nodded, professional composure returning. Of course. And we should schedule a meeting tomorrow to begin planning the next phase of development. As Rebecca left his office, she felt as though she was walking on air. After years of struggle and sacrifice, doors were finally opening. Her designs would help children beyond her own daughters. Her talent had been recognized. She had a real future at Reynolds Innovation. What she couldn't know was that forces were already in motion that would soon threaten everything she had worked so hard to build. 6 months after her presentation to the board, Rebecca stood in the main product development studio, surrounded by the nearly completed Emotion Dolls line. What had begun as simple wooden toys created at her kitchen table had evolved into a sophisticated product range ready for market. The core concept remained the same. Dolls with interchangeable facial expressions to help children identify and express emotions. But the execution had been refined and expanded with the resources of Reynolds Innovation behind it. There were now 12 different doll designs representing various ages, genders, and ethnicities, each with a complete set of emotion plates and accessories. Rebecca moved among the prototypes with quiet pride, adjusting a detail here, checking a mechanism there. The past 6 months had been the most intense and rewarding of her professional life, a steep learning curve of corporate procedures, manufacturing considerations, and marketing strategies, all while maintaining the integrity of her original vision. They look ready, said a voice behind her. Rebecca turned to find Matthew approaching, dressed more casually than usual in khakis and a button-down shirt with rolled sleeves. Since her promotion, their working relationship had evolved into a collaborative partnership. Matthew had gradually shed some of his reserved formality, allowing glimpses of the passionate creator who had founded the company with Laura. Almost, Rebecca replied, gesturing to a doll with brown skin and curly hair. We're still fine-tuning the happiness expression on Maya. The smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. Matthew picked up the doll, examining the facial plate critically. I see what you mean. The engineering team should be able to make that adjustment before final production. He set the doll down carefully. The internal launch event is scheduled for next Friday. Are you ready? Rebecca nodded, though butterflies immediately took flight in her stomach. The internal launch would be attended by the entire company as well as key retailers and educational consultants. It would be her first major public presentation as project design director. I think so. Dr. Bennett has agreed to speak about the therapeutic applications, and the marketing team has prepared some wonderful demonstrations with actual children using the dolls. Good, Matthew said, though he seemed distracted. Rebecca, there's something I need to discuss with you. Can we go to my office? Concern flickered through her at his serious tone. Of course. As they walked through the building, Rebecca noticed employees watching them with curious eyes. Despite her professional success and the growing respect she had earned through hard work and innovation, she was still something of an anomaly at Reynolds Innovation. The single mother plucked from obscurity who now led a major product line. And her frequent meetings with the CEO hadn't gone unnoticed, spawning inevitable whispers despite their strictly professional interactions. In Matthew's office, he closed the door and gestured for her to sit. I've just come from a meeting with Richard, he began, settling into the chair beside her rather than behind his desk. He's raising concerns about the production budget again. Rebecca frowned. Though Richard had abstained from vetoing the Emotion Dolls project, he had remained skeptical throughout the development process, questioning expenses and timeline extensions at every opportunity. But we're within the approved budget, she pointed out, and the focus groups have been overwhelmingly positive. The educational market is excited about this product. I know, Matthew agreed, and I've made that clear to him. But Richard is pushing for some last-minute changes to reduce costs, cheaper materials, fewer facial expressions, simplifying the packaging. Rebecca felt a surge of protective indignation. Those changes would compromise everything that makes the dolls effective. The quality of the materials is essential for the tactile experience, and limiting the emotional range defeats the entire purpose. I agree, Matthew said firmly, and I've told him we won't be making those changes. The product will launch as designed. Relief washed through her. Thank you. Matthew hesitated, then continued, but there's something else you should be aware of. Richard has been asking questions about your background and qualifications. He seems unusually interested in your personal history. A chill ran down Rebecca's spine. What kind of questions? About your time at Cornell, your family situation, how you and I met. Matthew looked uncomfortable. I've told him it's irrelevant to your professional performance, which has been exemplary, but I wanted you to know. Rebecca's mind raced. She had nothing to hide, but the idea of her personal struggles being scrutinized by someone who clearly doubted her worth made her skin crawl. Do you think he's trying to find a reason to discredit the project? Or me? Matthew sighed. Richard has always been protective of the company's resources and reputation. He and Laura were close colleagues before she and I started Reynolds Innovation. In fact, she was his student when he taught at Cornell. He's always felt a certain ownership of her legacy. This was new information for Rebecca. So this is personal for him? In a way, Matthew acknowledged. After Laura died, Richard wanted me to sell the company. He argued that without her creative direction, we should take the offers that were coming in from larger corporations. When I refused, he stayed on as CFO, but has been more challenging ever since. Rebecca processed this revelation. And now he sees me as somehow threatening that legacy? Matthew looked at her directly. Or continuing it, which might be even more threatening to his vision for the company's future. The subtext was clear. Richard wasn't just questioning her credentials. He was questioning her growing influence on Matthew and the company's direction. I see, Rebecca said quietly. What do you suggest I do? Nothing different, Matthew replied firmly. Continue doing the excellent work you have been doing. The Emotion Dolls will speak for themselves when they're released, and Richard, for all his doubts, is a businessman. Success will ultimately change his mind. Before Rebecca could respond, there was a knock at the door, and Olivia entered after Matthew's acknowledgement. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but the school just called. There's been an incident with Sophie and Lily. Rebecca stood immediately, alarm rising. What kind of incident? Are they hurt? Not physically, Olivia assured her, but apparently there was an altercation with some other children. The principal would like you to come as soon as possible. Rebecca gathered her purse, anxiety replacing their previous conversation. I need to go. Of course, Matthew said, rising as well. Take my car. It's faster than waiting for a taxi. Olivia, call my driver, please. That's not necessary, Rebecca began, but Matthew cut her off. It is. Go to your daughters. We can continue this discussion later. 20 minutes later, Rebecca sat in the principal's office at Lakeside Elementary, where Sophie and Lily had been enrolled since moving to a better apartment near the school. The twins sat beside her, unusually subdued. Sophie had clearly been crying, while Lily maintained her typical solemn expression, though her eyes held a wounded look that tore at Rebecca's heart. Ms. Harper, thank you for coming so quickly, Principal Davis said, her kind face creased with concern. I wanted to discuss this situation with you directly rather than just sending the girls home with a note. What happened? Rebecca asked, glancing at her daughters. The principal hesitated, choosing her words carefully. It seems there was some unkind talk on the playground about you and your family situation. Rebecca's stomach dropped. What kind of talk? Mom, Sophie interjected, her voice trembling. Jenny Miller said you were only pretending to design toys so you could trick Mr. Reynolds into giving you money because we're poor. She said her mom told her you were a gold digger. She stumbled over the unfamiliar term. Rebecca felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. She stared at her daughter, momentarily speechless, as the cruel words hung in the space between them. And then Tommy said we only got into this school because you— Lily's voice was barely audible, her eyes downcast. Because you were dating our boss. He said his dad works at Reynolds too, and everyone knows. Principal Davis cleared her throat awkwardly. Children often misunderstand adult situations and repeat things they've heard at home without context. I've spoken with Jenny and Tommy about the importance of kindness and not spreading hurtful rumors, but I thought you should be aware. Rebecca nodded mechanically, her mind racing. Where had these children gotten such ideas? Who had been discussing her in their homes with such malice? What happened after they said these things? She managed to ask. Sophie looked up, a flash of defiance breaking through her tears. I told them they were lying, that you're the best toy designer in the whole world, and Mr. Reynolds hired you because you're smart. And then Sophie pushed Jenny, Lily added quietly, and Tommy laughed at us, so I kicked him in the shin. Principal Davis sighed. That's the other reason I called you in. While I understand the girls were provoked, we have a strict no-violence policy. Rebecca squeezed the twins' hands. I understand. Girls, you know we don't solve problems by pushing or kicking, no matter what someone says. But they were lying about you. Sophie protested, fresh tears welling in her eyes. I know, sweetheart, and I appreciate you wanting to defend me. But there are better ways to handle mean words. Rebecca turned back to the principal. What happens now? The children have all apologized to each other, and given the circumstances, I think we can consider this a learning opportunity rather than grounds for formal punishment. Principal Davis's expression softened. But Ms. Harper, you might want to prepare the girls for the possibility of more comments like these. Once rumors start circulating among parents, it can take time for them to dissipate. The drive home was silent, the twins unusually subdued in the back seat of the car service Matthew had arranged. Rebecca's mind churned with questions and growing dread. How widespread were these rumors? Had they reached the company itself? Was this connected to Richard Morgan's sudden interest in her background? As they entered their apartment, modest but comfortable in a safe neighborhood close to good schools, Rebecca knelt down to eye level with her daughters. I need you both to know something very important, she said, taking their small hands in hers. Mr. Reynolds hired me because of my design skills and hard work. The emotion dolls are being made because they're good toys that will help children. You never ever have to worry that anyone is saying true things when they suggest otherwise. We know, Mom, Sophie said with touching confidence. You're the best at making toys. And Mr. Reynolds isn't your boyfriend, Lily added with the direct clarity of a 5-year-old. He's just nice to us because he doesn't have any kids of his own. Rebecca hugged them both close, blinking back tears. That's right. Now how about some hot chocolate while we talk about better ways to handle mean words at school? Later that night after the twins were asleep, Rebecca sat at her laptop searching for the source of the rumors. She hadn't wanted to ask Matthew directly. The mere conversation would create an awkward dynamic, but she needed to understand what she was facing. A simple search yielded the answer, and it was worse than she had imagined. On the screen before her was an article from Business Wire, a popular business gossip site. Reynolds Innovation CEO's latest innovation. Single mom from Southside hired after chance meeting. The article wasn't explicitly accusatory, maintaining just enough journalistic restraint to avoid libel, but the insinuations were clear. It referenced her lack of completed formal education, her financial struggles, and speculated about the real reasons a CEO might take such personal interest in a struggling single mother. Most disturbingly, it contained personal details that few people knew. The name of her father's care facility before his death, the circumstances of her husband leaving during her pregnancy, even the fact that she had once faced eviction. Rebecca's hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments section, filled with cruel speculation and judgments from strangers who knew nothing about her life or her work. The article had been published 3 days ago, which explained the sudden change in how some colleagues had been treating her in the playground incidents with the twins. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Olivia. "Have you seen it? Don't read the comments. This will blow over. Call me if you need to talk." So Olivia knew, which meant everyone at Reynolds Innovation probably knew as well, including Matthew. The realization that he might have seen this article, might at this very moment be questioning her motives or character, made her physically ill. After all he had done for her family, the thought that he might now view their relationship through this tawdry lens was unbearable. Rebecca closed her laptop and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. 6 months ago, she had been on the verge of financial ruin, working a dead-end job while her talents withered, watching her daughters go without things other children took for granted. Now she had a career, security, respect, and it was all threatened by cruel gossip that twisted her hard-won achievements into something sordid. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Matthew. "I just saw the article. It's garbage. Don't let it distract you from what matters. We'll talk tomorrow." The message should have been reassuring, but it only intensified her anxiety. The mere fact that they needed to discuss such allegations created a shadow over their professional relationship. How could she face him tomorrow, knowing he had read those insinuations? How could she face anyone at the company? Sleep eluded her that night as she weighed her options. By dawn, she had made her decision. It wasn't just about her pride. It was about protecting her daughters from further hurt and the company from potential scandal just before a major product launch. She would resign. The letter was brief but clear, thanking Matthew and Reynolds Innovation for the opportunity while citing personal reasons for her departure. She sent it by email at 5:30 a.m., then spent the next 2 hours packing essential belongings. She had saved enough from her salary to afford a security deposit on a small apartment in Bridgeport, a working-class neighborhood far from Reynolds headquarters. It wouldn't be as nice as their current place, but it would be a fresh start, away from the whispers and stares. By the time the twins woke up, Rebecca had arranged a moving service and called their school to begin transfer procedures. She explained to the bewildered girls that they were going on an adventure, using the same positive framing she had employed during previous difficult transitions in their young lives. "But what about the emotion dolls?" Sophie asked, confusion evident in her face. "What about your job making real toys?" "Sometimes grown-ups need to make hard choices," Rebecca explained gently. "The dolls will still be made, but I'm going to find a different job. One where we can have more privacy." "Is it because of what those kids said at school?" Lily asked, her perceptive gaze seeing straight through her mother's forced cheerfulness. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "Partly yes. Some grown-ups are saying unkind things too, and I don't want those words to hurt you anymore." "But they're lying," Sophie protested. "Why do we have to leave if they're the ones who are wrong?" "Because sometimes being right isn't enough, sweetheart," Rebecca said softly. "Sometimes it's better to make a fresh start where people don't have the wrong ideas about us." The twins exchanged one of their silent communications. Then Lily asked the question Rebecca had been dreading. "Does Mr. Reynolds know we're leaving?" "I've sent him a letter explaining everything," Rebecca assured them, avoiding the deeper implications of the question. "Now let's pack your favorite books and toys. We need to be ready when the movers arrive." At Reynolds Innovation headquarters, Matthew stared at his computer screen in disbelief, reading Rebecca's resignation letter for the 3rd time. He had been up most of the night, and after seeing the Business Wire article, furious at its thinly veiled accusations and determined to track down its source. Now this, a terse, Formal resignation delivered without warning or discussion. Olivia, he called, and his assistant appeared immediately at his door. Have you seen this? He gestured to the email. She nodded grimly. I just got a call from HR. Ms. Harper has already turned in her keycard and building pass. Matthew stood abruptly. Call her. Get her on the phone right now. I've tried, sir. Her company phone has been turned off, and she's not answering her personal number. Then I'm going to her apartment. He grabbed his jacket. Sir, Olivia said carefully, it might be better to give her some space. That article was brutal, and the comments were worse. Matthew paused, his expression darkening. Did you know about this before last night? Were there rumors circulating in the office? Olivia hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Some talk, yes, mostly after she was promoted to director. But nothing like this public article. And no one thought to tell me. His voice was dangerously quiet. It was just office gossip, sir. Every company has it. And bringing it to your attention would only have given it more credibility. She met his gaze directly. Besides, you and Ms. Harper have always maintained a strictly professional relationship. There was nothing to the rumors. Matthew didn't respond to this directly, unwilling to examine too closely the complex emotions that had been developing over the months of working closely with Rebecca. Instead, he asked, do we know who leaked those personal details to the press? Not yet. It is checking email records, but if someone used a personal device or account, find out, Matthew said firmly. This wasn't just malicious gossip. It was a deliberate attempt to sabotage a key employee and, by extension, our most promising new product line. He picked up his phone. I'm still going to her apartment. She deserves better than this, Olivia. So do her daughters. But when Matthew arrived at Rebecca's building 20 minutes later, he was too late. The apartment managers informed him that Ms. Harper and her children had departed 2 hours earlier with a moving service. No, she hadn't left a forwarding address. No, she hadn't mentioned where they were going. And no, he couldn't provide any additional information due to tenant privacy policies. Matthew returned to his car, frustration building. He tried calling Rebecca again, but the call went straight to voicemail. Rebecca, it's Matthew. Please call me back. Whatever you've read or heard, we can fix this. The emotion dolls need you. The company needs you. He paused, then added more quietly, please don't disappear. At least let me know you and the girls are all right. Over the next 2 weeks, Matthew threw himself into damage control. Publicly, he issued a strong statement supporting Rebecca's professional credentials and contributions to Reynolds Innovation, while condemning the baseless speculation and invasion of privacy in the recent media coverage. Internally, he made it clear that any employee found to have contributed to the rumors or leak would face immediate termination. He also continued searching for Rebecca, but she had effectively vanished. Her social media accounts had been deactivated, her email went unanswered, and the few professional contacts she had made at the company claimed they had no idea where she had gone. The Emotion Dolls project continued under the guidance of the design team, but without Rebecca's vision and passion, something essential was missing. Matthew found himself in the unusual position of taking a more hands-on role with the design elements, drawing on memories of his collaborations with Laura to make decisions he thought Rebecca would approve. During a late evening at the office, Richard Morgan appeared in Matthew's doorway, his expression unusually somber. Working late again? Richard observed, entering without invitation and settling into a chair across from Matthew's desk. Someone has to ensure the Emotion Dolls launch stays on schedule, Matthew replied, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. He had been coldly professional with Richard since Rebecca's departure, unable to shake the suspicion that his CFO might have been involved in the leak. About that, Richard said, straightening his already impeccable tie, the board is concerned about the project's viability without its originator. Harper's resignation has created significant disruption, and the PR fallout from that article hasn't helped matters. The PR fallout that someone deliberately engineered, Matthew noted pointedly, and her name is Rebecca, not Harper. You worked with her for 6 months. You could at least show that basic respect. Richard's expression remained impassive. I'm simply communicating the board's concerns, Matthew. They're wondering if it might be better to delay the launch until things settle. No, Matthew said firmly, we're proceeding as planned. The concept is solid, the market research is strong, and the product design is nearly complete. Rebecca's departure is unfortunate, but it doesn't change the value of what she created. Even if that creation comes with unwelcome attention, the Business Wire article may be just the beginning. There could be follow-up stories, more speculation about your professional relationship. Matthew's patience, already thin, snapped entirely. Let's stop pretending, Richard. You've opposed this project from the beginning. You've questioned Rebecca's qualifications despite her obvious talent. And now, coincidentally, highly personal details about her life end up in a gossip article right before our product launch. He leaned forward, eyes locked on Richard's. Did you have anything to do with that leak? Richard's expression hardened. That's an offensive accusation, Matthew. I've dedicated 15 years to this company, longer than you have, if we're counting the years you checked out after Laura died. The deliberate cruelty of the remark hung in the air between them. Matthew had never spoken openly about his struggle with depression after Laura's death, but Richard had been one of the few who knew how close he had come to ending his own life. Get out of my office, Matthew said, his voice dangerously quiet. Matthew. Now, Richard, before I say something we'll both regret. After Richard left, Matthew sat motionless, his mind churning with anger and suspicion. He had no proof that Richard was behind the leak, but the timing was too convenient, the personal details too specific to have come from a casual acquaintance. He picked up his phone and called Olivia, despite the late hour. I need you to do something for me first thing tomorrow, he told her. Contact every employee in IT and have them search Richard's company email and browser history for the past month. Any contact with news outlets, any searches for information about Rebecca Harper. And check his calendar. I want to know who he's been meeting with. The next morning brought an unexpected breakthrough, but not from the direction Matthew had anticipated. Tom Daniels, a junior member of the IT department, requested an urgent meeting. I think I know how the information about Ms. Harper got leaked, he said nervously, once they were alone in Matthew's office. But sir, I need assurance that I won't face repercussions for coming forward. You have my word, Matthew assured him. What do you know? 2 weeks ago, Mr. Morgan asked me to recover some deleted emails from Ms. Harper's company account. He said it was for a security audit and showed me proper authorization paperwork. Tom fidgeted with his tie. But after I gave him the recovered data, I noticed some unusual external email activity from his account. He contacted a reporter at Business Wire, forwarding what looked like personal information about Ms. Harper. Matthew's jaw tightened. Do you have proof of this? Tom nodded, placing a flash drive on the desk. Screenshots and logs. I should have reported it immediately, but I was afraid. Mr. Morgan is a senior executive, and I'm just a tech. But after seeing what happened to Ms. Harper and her daughters, it didn't feel right to stay quiet. You did the right thing coming forward, Matthew said, and I'll make sure you are protected. After reviewing the evidence, which clearly showed Richard sending Rebecca's personal information to a Business Wire reporter with a note suggesting she might want to look into the background of Reynolds Innovation's newest executive, Matthew called an emergency meeting with the company's legal counsel. The conclusion was inevitable. Richard Morgan's actions constituted a serious breach of company ethics and possibly employment law. By that afternoon, he had been escorted from the building, his access revoked, and a formal investigation launched. The immediate corporate crisis addressed, Matthew returned to the more personal problem: finding Rebecca. With Richard's sabotage confirmed, surely she would reconsider her resignation if she knew the truth. But first, he had to locate her. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a scheduled classroom visit to test the Emotion Dolls prototypes with children, Matthew encountered Sophie and Lily's former teacher from Lakeside Elementary. Mr. Reynolds, she greeted him warmly. It's lovely to see you again. The children miss having Sophie and Lily in class. Such bright, creative girls. Yes, they are, Matthew agreed, seizing the opportunity. I've been trying to reach their mother about some of her belongings left at the office. You wouldn't happen to know where they've transferred to? The teacher hesitated. I'm not supposed to share that information, but since you're a family friend, I believe Ms. Harper mentioned enrolling them at Bridgeport Elementary. They've moved to that neighborhood, I think. Bridgeport, a working-class area on the south side, far from the corporate environment of downtown Chicago. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. That weekend, Matthew drove to Bridgeport, a neighborhood of modest brick apartments and small family businesses. Without an address, he had little hope of finding Rebecca directly, but perhaps he could discover where she was working. He visited shops and cafes, showing Rebecca's photo and asking if anyone had seen her, but met only shaking heads and suspicious glances. Ready to give up for the day, he stopped at a small craft store called Maker's Corner. The elderly woman behind the counter eyed him warily as he approached. "Excuse me," Matthew began, showing the photo on his phone. "I'm looking for this woman, Rebecca Harper. She may have recently moved to this area with her twin daughters." The woman's expression remained neutral. "What do you want with her?" The directness of the question caught Matthew off guard. "I'm Matthew Reynolds. We work together. There's been a misunderstanding and I need to speak with her." "You're the CEO," the woman said, recognition dawning. "The one from the toy company." Matthew nodded, hope rising. "You know Rebecca?" The woman studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. "She works here 3 days a week, helps with custom orders, and teaches children's craft classes. Good with her hands, that one." "Is she here today?" Matthew asked eagerly. "Back room, inventory." "But listen," the woman leaned forward, her voice dropping. "That girl's been through enough. She came here to start fresh, not to have her past chase her down. Whatever you've got to say, make it kind." Matthew nodded solemnly. "I understand. Thank you." The back room was small and crowded with shelves of craft supplies. Rebecca stood with her back to the door, counting spools of ribbon and marking them in a notebook. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Even in this mundane setting, doing ordinary work, there was a grace and focus to her movements that Matthew had come to recognize. "Rebecca," he said softly. She froze, then slowly turned. The shock on her face gave way to a complex mix of emotions: embarrassment, wariness, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Matthew," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "You're very good at disappearing." "I had practice after my ex-husband left," she said, setting down her notebook. "What are you doing here?" "We identified the source of the leak," Matthew said, deciding directness was the best approach. "It was Richard. He accessed your personal information and sent it to that reporter. He's been fired, and we're pursuing legal action for the breach of privacy." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Richard? But why would he—" "To sabotage the Emotion Dolls project," Matthew explained. "He's been pushing to sell the company for years. Your success threatened that agenda." He took a step forward. "Rebecca, none of those rumors were true. No one who matters believed them. Please come back. The project needs you. The dolls are your creation. You should be there when they launch." Rebecca crossed her arms, a protective gesture. "It's not that simple, Matthew. Those rumors affected my daughters. They were bullied at school because of me, because of implications about us." She met his gaze directly. "And even if Richard started it, those whispers were already there. People were already talking." "People always talk," Matthew countered. "But we know the truth. We've never been anything but professional colleagues who respect each other's work." Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes. Disappointment, resignation. She looked away. "Exactly. Which is why I need to make a clean break. Find somewhere I can be judged on my own merits without complications." "The Emotion Dolls are your merits," Matthew insisted. "Don't let Richard take that away from you. Don't let rumors rob you of what you've earned." Rebecca sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's not just about the job, Matthew. It's about Sophie and Lily. They're finally settling in here. New school, new friends. I can't uproot them again because of my professional ambitions." Matthew recognized the impasse. Pushing harder would only drive her further away. "I understand," he said finally. "But will you at least consider coming to the launch? Not as an employee, but as the creator. You deserve to see your vision become reality." Before Rebecca could answer, the shop bell jingled, and two familiar voices called out, "Mom!" Sophie and Lily burst into the back room, school backpacks bouncing, then stopped abruptly when they saw Matthew. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lily broke into a wide smile. "Mr. Reynolds!" she exclaimed, running to hug him without hesitation. "Did you come to visit us?" "I did," Matthew said, kneeling to receive her embrace. "I missed you both." Sophie approached more cautiously. Did you find Mom because of my drawing? I told Lily you would. Matthew looked confused. What drawing? Rebecca explained reluctantly. Sophie has been drawing pictures of our old apartment in the company building. She says she's leaving clues so you can find us, like in a treasure hunt. She gave her daughter a pointed look, even though I explained that wasn't a good idea. But it worked, Sophie declared triumphantly. He's here. The simple logic of a 5-year-old cut through the adult complications. Matthew couldn't help but smile. Actually, your teacher told me you might be in Bridgeport, but your drawing would have been a much better clue. I have lots more, Sophie offered eagerly. I can show you. Not today, Sophie, Rebecca interjected firmly. Mr. Reynolds was just leaving. He has a company to run. Matthew stood, recognizing his dismissal. Right. Well, it was wonderful to see you both. Keep up with your drawing, Sophie. And Lily, remember what we talked about with the emotion dolls? Feelings are like weather, always changing. Lily nodded solemnly. I remember. Mom still makes us feeling friends at home, but they're not as nice as the ones at your company. They're perfect exactly as they are, Matthew assured her, then turned to Rebecca. Thank you for seeing me. The invitation stands for the launch or anything else. As he turned to leave, Rebecca called after him, Wait, you forgot something. She disappeared into a small office and returned with a carved wooden doll, one of the original prototypes for the Emotion Dolls line. You should have this for the archive room with the other important pieces of company history. Matthew accepted the doll, noting that it had been carefully finished with Laura's signature expression style, the eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond the simple wooden form. Thank you, he said quietly. I'll make sure it has a place of honor. Outside the shop, Matthew sat in his car for a long moment, the wooden doll resting on the passenger seat beside him. The encounter had not gone as he had hoped, but at least he had seen for himself that Rebecca and the twins were safe, if not flourishing. She had made her choice, and he needed to respect it, no matter how empty the company felt without her presence. He started the engine, then noticed something unusual about the doll. The base seemed thicker than the standard design. Curious, he examined it more closely and discovered a small compartment built into the bottom, sealed with a tiny wooden plug. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, written in a hand he would recognize anywhere. Laura's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Matthew unfolded the note and read, My dearest Matthew, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found my final design concept. I've been thinking about children who struggle with emotions they can't name, like the feelings that will come after I'm no longer here. Imagine a doll whose face can change like our feelings do, showing children that it's normal for emotions to shift and transform. A tool for tiny hearts to understand their biggest feelings. This will be my last gift to the children we never had but always wanted, and my last wish for you that someday you'll find your way back to creating joy, not just managing what we built. With endless love, Laura. Matthew stared at the note, his vision blurring with tears. How had this ended up in Rebecca's prototype? Had she found it in the archive room? Had it somehow guided her design without her knowledge? The coincidence was too profound to be mere chance. Rebecca's Emotion Dolls concept had unknowingly fulfilled Laura's final vision for the company, a bridge between past and future that neither of them could have anticipated. Matthew carefully refolded the note and placed it in his wallet. Then, instead of driving away, he turned the car off and returned to the shop, the wooden doll clutched in his hand. When the bell jingled again, Rebecca looked up from the counter where she was helping a customer, surprise evident in her expression. Just a moment, Matthew said, holding up the doll. There's something you need to see. Matthew carefully refolded the note and placed it in his wallet. Then, instead of driving away, he turned the car off and returned to the shop, the wooden doll clutched in his hand. When the bell jingled again, Rebecca looked up from the counter where she was helping a customer, surprise evident in her expression. Just a moment, Matthew said, holding up the doll. There's something you need to see. Matthew held up the doll, his hand trembling slightly. Rebecca, look at this. There's a hidden compartment in the base. Rebecca frowned, setting aside the receipt she'd been writing for a customer. A compartment? I never designed one in the prototypes. I know. That's why I came back. Matthew carefully removed the small wooden plug and extracted the yellowed paper. This was inside. It's from Laura. Rebecca's eyes widened as she accepted the unfolded note. Her gaze moved across the handwritten lines, her expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. When she finished reading, she looked up at Matthew, her voice barely above a whisper. This is impossible. I never saw this note. I didn't know Laura had this idea. Yet you created exactly what she envisioned, Matthew said softly. A doll whose face can change like our feelings do. A tool for tiny hearts to understand their biggest feelings. Those are her words, written before she died. The coincidence was too profound to dismiss as mere chance. Something greater seemed to be at work, a connection across time that neither of them could fully comprehend. She wanted me to find my way back to creating joy, Matthew continued, his voice thick with emotion. Not just managing what we built. And then you appeared, with your daughters and your wooden dolls. Rebecca stood motionless, the note still in her hands. The shop around them faded away as the significance of the moment enveloped them both. I think, Matthew said carefully, that Laura would see this as a sign. That the emotion dolls were always meant to exist. That perhaps we were meant to find each other. Before Rebecca could respond, the shop bell jingled again as the front door opened. Sophie and Lily's teacher appeared, looking apologetic. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Ms. Harper, but the after-school program ended early today due to a staff meeting. I offered to drop the girls off since it was on my way home. The moment between Matthew and Rebecca hung suspended as reality reasserted itself. The shop, the teacher, the responsibilities that couldn't be ignored. Thank you, Ms. Chen, Rebecca managed. I appreciate that. As the teacher left, Sophie and Lily looked between their mother and Matthew, sensing the charged atmosphere. What's that paper? Sophie asked, her natural curiosity irrepressible. Matthew exchanged a glance with Rebecca, who nodded slightly. It's a very special letter, he explained, kneeling to the girl's level. From my wife who died. She had an idea for toys that help children with their feelings, just like your mom's feeling friends. Lily's eyes widened. Like magic? Maybe a little like magic, Matthew agreed with gentle smile. Rebecca carefully refolded the note and handed it back to Matthew. Girls, why don't you go to the break room and have your snack? I need to talk to Mr. Reynolds for a few minutes. Once the twins had disappeared into the back, Rebecca took a deep breath. Matthew, I don't know what to make of this. It's extraordinary. Come back, he said simply. Not just for the launch. Come back to the company, to the project. The emotion dolls are your creation, but they're also Laura's final gift. They deserve to have both of you behind them. Rebecca shook her head, conflict evident in her expression. The rumors are being addressed, Matthew interrupted firmly. Richard has been fired. We're issuing a formal retraction and apology. The board has unanimously backed you and the project. He hesitated, then added more softly, but even if none of that were true, I would still be asking you to come back. Because the dolls matter. Because your talent matters. And because, he paused, gathering courage. Because you and the girls matter to me. More than I expected. More than I thought possible after Laura. Rebecca looked away, blinking rapidly. I need time to think. This is all so sudden. Of course, Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. Take all the time you need. Just promise me you'll consider it, and that you'll come to the launch, no matter what you decide. Rebecca met his gaze again, a small smile finally breaking through. I promise. So 1 year later, the spacious living room of the Lincoln Park apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, the evening light painting the water in shades of gold and amber. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline created a glittering backdrop to the domestic scene within. Matthew sat on the plush sectional sofa, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up after a long day at the office. Beside him, Sophie and Lily, now 6 years old, were carefully arranging photographs in a handmade album, their face intense with concentration. Is this one good? Sophie asked, holding up a photograph of the four of them at the Emotion Buddies launch event. Perfect, Matthew nodded, watching as she carefully positioned it on the page. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray with mugs of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. a family tradition for special occasions. She had traded her work clothes for comfortable jeans and a soft sweater, her blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders. "How's the anniversary album coming along?" she asked, setting the tray on the coffee table. "Almost done," Lily replied, "but we need the special picture." Matthew reached into his pocket and withdrew a small envelope. "This one?" Lily nodded solemnly as he handed her the photograph, a restored image of Laura with her bright red hair and brilliant smile, holding the very first wooden puzzle Reynolds Innovation had produced. "She goes on the first page," Lily instructed, carefully placing the photo in the center, "because she started everything." Rebecca sat beside Matthew, their shoulders touching comfortably as they watched the girls work. The past year had been a journey, returning to Reynolds Innovation, rebuilding trust, navigating their evolving relationship, and finally acknowledging what had been growing between them since that first night on the restaurant terrace. The Emotion Buddies line had launched to critical acclaim and commercial success, with orders from schools, therapists, and parents exceeding all projections. The therapeutic applications had expanded beyond what either of them had initially imagined, with special editions now being developed for children with autism, anxiety disorders, and trauma. "Look what I found," Sophie announced, pulling something from her backpack. She held up a newspaper clipping about the Reynolds Innovation Foundation, the nonprofit they had established to provide emotion buddies to children in hospitals, foster care, and underserved communities. "Where did you get that?" Rebecca asked, surprised. "Ms. Chen helped me print it from the computer," Sophie explained, "for our special page about helping other kids." Matthew smiled, remembering the day they had signed the foundation papers. Rebecca had insisted that the foundation's mission statement include Laura's words from her final note, a tool for tiny hearts to understand their biggest feelings. Lily finished arranging the photos and sat back to admire their work. On the coffee table beside the album stood a row of Emotion Buddies, the original prototype Rebecca had created for the twins, the production model that had launched the line, and a special edition with features from both designs that Matthew had crafted by hand for their 6-month anniversary. "All done," Sophie declared, closing the album carefully. "Can we have our surprise now?" Matthew and Rebecca exchanged a knowing glance. "I think they've been patient enough," Rebecca said with a smile. Matthew nodded and reached behind the sofa cushion, retrieving a small gift-wrapped box. "This is for both of you," he said, handing it to the eager twins. They tore into the wrapping paper with synchronized efficiency, revealing a wooden box with intricate stars carved into the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, were 2 matching silver lockets. "Open them," Rebecca encouraged softly. The girls carefully opened the lockets to find tiny photos inside, a family portrait on one side, and on the other a picture of the night sky filled with stars. "Remember what Grandpa said about the stars?" Rebecca asked, her voice gentle. "That people we love become stars when they die," Lily recited, "so we're never alone in the dark." "And that we're all made of stardust," Sophie added, "so we're all connected." Matthew helped clasp the lockets around their necks. "These are to remind you that family isn't just who we're born with, it's also who we choose to love." As the girls admired their new treasures, Rebecca leaned against Matthew's shoulder, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "Are you ready to tell them?" He nodded, taking her hand in his. "Girls, we have something important to ask you." The twins looked up, instantly alert to the shift in tone. "You know that Matthew and I love each other very much," Rebecca began carefully, "and that we've become a family over this past year." "We want to make that official," Matthew continued. "I've asked your mom to marry me, and she said yes." Sophie and Lily exchanged one of their twin glances, a silent communication passing between them. "But," Matthew added, "before we do that, we wanted to ask how you feel about it, because this decision affects all of us." For a moment, the girls were silent. Then Lily, always the more intuitive of the two, asked, "Will you be our dad? For real?" Matthew's throat tightened with emotion. "If you would like that, yes. I would love to be your dad." The twins launched themselves at Matthew and Rebecca, creating a tangle of arms and laughter on the sofa. "Yes!" they chorused. As the excitement settled, Sophie looked thoughtful. "But what about your wife in heaven? Laura? Will she be sad?" Matthew exchanged a glance with Rebecca before answering. "I think Laura would be very happy. She always wanted me to find joy again. and she would have loved you both so much. She's part of our family too, Lily declared with the certainty only a 6-year-old could muster. Even if we can't see her. Rebecca smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. That's exactly right. Later that evening, after the girls had been tucked into bed, Matthew and Rebecca stood by the window, looking out at the city lights and the darker expanse of the lake beyond. 1 year ago, I never could have imagined this, Rebecca said softly. Any of it. Matthew wrapped his arm around her shoulders. When I found Laura's note in that doll, I finally understood something she used to say. The most valuable gifts often come to us in unexpected packages. Rebecca turned to face him. Like two little girls asking for leftovers? Exactly like that, he smiled, touching her cheek gently. Or like a wooden doll with a face that could change. Or a CEO with a heart that could heal, she added. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, while inside, a family created by chance, choice, and perhaps a touch of something more magical had found their way home to each other. On the shelf above the twins' desk, the original Emotion Buddy, half Rebecca's design, half Laura's vision, watched over them all, its changeable face currently displaying a serene smile of contentment.